Hi book lovers, welcome back to my channel. For today's video, I wanted to try to answer a question that I get a lot on my channel, and that is how I read so much. If you've ever watched any of my monthly wrap-ups, you might already know that I sort of average around 30 books a month. I typically go through a book a day, and if it's a good month, I can sometimes read up to like 40-45 books. It's a lot, I recognize this, even though I'm kind of used to it by now, but I do get comments where people say that I read in a month, how much they read in a year. So I guess I just wanted to share some tips on how I'm able to read so much, how much time I spend reading, and how I'm able to sustain at such a fast pace. Last year in 2021, it was an especially good reading year for me, and by good I mean I read a shit ton. At least according to my Goodreads, it's the most that I've ever read in a year, and that is partly because of the whole pandemic thing. I read almost 500 books, which is crazy even to me. I think my total was 483. The first thing that comes to my mind with why I'm able to read so much is honestly the genre, and since I'm a romance reader, I'm a romance booktube channel, 99.9% of the books that I read are romance books. I know I read a lot compared to general readers, but in the romance community with romance readers, I feel like I'm pretty average. Romance readers read so many freaking books. I have a couple friends who've read even more books than I have, but I feel like it's specifically romance, the romance genre, where people will read a couple hundred books a year, and it's totally normal. Not that I'm saying that you have to read romance in order to read a lot, but I feel like this community is one that fosters a lot of reading. Everyone is always discovering new books and new authors. They're always recommending them, so there are more books to add to your TBR. It's like an endless cycle of reading and then buying more books because you're adding more books to your TBR. At least that's my experience with being in the romance community. I love it though. I have a couple thousand books on my TBR, and I don't think it's gonna ever come down from that. And on the other side of the romance genre, romance authors write so many books. Usually, especially with traditionally published books, an author will put out a book once a year, if that. But with romance authors, and especially indie romance authors, some of them put out a book like every 2 to 3 months. So I, as a reader, have been pretty spoiled when it comes to having so many new books to read. So having a lot of options like this, it definitely makes me feel like I need to read more because I want to read everything. It's pretty motivating for me having so many books out there to read, although I can see it being overwhelming too. But I feel like if you know what you like, if you have a certain favorite author or favorite trope or genre that you like reading, you're just never gonna run out of those certain books to read. And that's kind of related to my second tip, which is that I stick to the genre that I know and love, which is romance. I read books from my favorite authors who I know will usually never disappoint me. I know which writing styles work for me and which don't, and when it comes to like story topics or story tropes, I know which ones I love and I usually stick to them. Although I will say I'm not too picky when it comes to tropes. I usually love them all, but if you're a little pickier with stuff, if you have tropes that you really hate, obviously don't read them unless it's from like a favorite author that you trust. So picking books that you're excited to read, like it's from a favorite author, or you love fake dating and it has that trope, that's what helps me keep wanting to read books. Not to say that I don't ever get in reading slumps, because I do, and sometimes I just don't want to read any books for like 2 weeks, but there's always going to be some book with an amazing sounding blurb that I desperately want to read. Sometimes it works, sometimes it's a disappointment, but I feel like just being excited to read is what helps me read so much. It sounds simple enough, but I'm sure a lot of people who don't really read or don't read that often, they were put off by reading because they didn't enjoy the books that they read growing up. So it does help to know what you like and not hate read something you know you won't like. I've never been a hate reader because I just don't have time for that. I don't have time to read a book that I know I won't enjoy. And another big thing that I've kind of recently discovered helps me read a lot is audiobooks. Please don't be the person to comment that audiobooks are not reading. I don't care if you're being literal about it, but audiobooks are books, and sometimes they can be an even better experience than just reading reading an ebook or a paperback. I've been listening to audiobooks for a very long time, since 2014 I want to say, but I've never been as voracious as I am like now, mostly because I was still in college and audiobooks were expensive. I was limited to maybe once a month. I would only ever listen through Audible, my Audible subscription, and then the pandemic hit and I got myself a virtual library card at my big local library. I'm lucky enough to live in LA and have access to the LA Public Library, which is huge. They have so many books and so many romance books. So since 2020, my Libby app has been my lifesaver. I read so many audiobooks because of my library, and having access to so many books is of course going to help me read more books so I can spend less. But that's not always an option for people. Sometimes your library just sucks and doesn't have the books that you want, even if you do request them. There are some other audiobook subscriptions. I've never really tried anything but Audible or Libro FM, but there's a lot of audio subscriptions out there and you can definitely try the ones that you like. I'll link a couple ones that I know down below, but I would highly recommend trying audiobooks even if you're new to it. I never thought that I would fall in love with audiobooks, but I did. I mean, it does help that I listened to a really good audiobook my first time. It was a Christina Lauren book. It was a reread of one of my favorite books, so I knew I was gonna enjoy it. It was actually a Dirty Rowdy Thing by Christina Lauren. So that book got me hooked on audiobooks, but that was back in 2014. So fast forward to 2020 and I got my library card and I was downloading all these audiobooks, and that's when I started speeding up my audiobook speed. For years I used to be a strictly normal regular speed, 1x speed, and I never tried to listen faster than that unless an audiobook narrator was just especially slow. But then I saw other people, like my friends, were listening at higher speeds and I was like, okay, let me give this a try. So I gradually worked my way up through the speeds. It took me like a good year to go from 1.5 to 2.5 to 3 times the speed. It does take a while to get used to, and sometimes books just have different narrator speeds in general, so I'm always changing up my speeds anyway. But increasing that audio speed helps me read so much more. Instead of taking 7 to 8 hours to listen to a book, I can finish it in 3 hours or less, and it definitely helps that I'm able to listen to my audiobooks while I'm working. I pretty much listen to audiobooks any chance I can get, when I'm walking my dog, when I'm driving, like anytime I'm not watching something or reading, I'm listening to an audiobook. I do highly recommend having the Kindle Unlimited subscription because sometimes you can listen to audiobooks for free through that subscription. It's only for certain titles, it's not for every single audiobook, but I do have a video if you're curious to see what books you can listen to through KU. And besides audiobooks, I've just found that I read so much faster if I'm reading an ebook versus like a physical copy of a book. I rarely touch my paperbacks anymore. I collect them because I love the book, but I don't actually read them. So the Libby app and my Kindle, those are my lifesavers. I love them so much. And my last tip, because my sun is setting and I'm losing my light, but I found for me, reading and binging series that are completed helps me so much. I'm terrible with finishing series when it's not complete yet. If I have to wait for the next book or wait for the final book and it's not like a top favorite author, I will probably forget to get back to that series. I have so many old series that I've just never completed because I was waiting for the book to come out and just moved on from it. So I personally like reading a series that are complete so I can binge the whole thing. I love reading books in a series back to back. Like sometimes it's hard to find like a good series, but once you find one that's addicting, you just can't stop reading, and then you find yourself like 3 days later you've binged on 3-4 books. So I guess to wrap things up, find a good community that fosters your love of reading, that gives you some good recommendations, find some people that you can trust to talk about books and recommend you books, learn what you enjoy reading and then stick to it. I mean, it is nice to, you know, go out of your comfort zone, but if it works, why stray from it? And the last two are pretty simple. Try audiobooks and read finished series. I hope those tips are helpful. If you have your own tips that help you read more, let me know. I'm sure other people would love to hear them as well. I've been reading since I was 12 and I honestly don't think I will ever stop. Thank you so much for watching and I will see you all next time. Bye!